because we want to be able to share it. And this camera is now off. We want to be able to share it with folks after the fact. And I am spotlighting the main video, but if you stay in gallery, you can see everybody. You might want to see everybody. Nancy, you're looking very fine this evening.
Thank
your
you.
husband.
My husband?
Your husband cannot see you, but he is blowing kisses.
What husband?
Not you, Nancy. The other Nancy.
Oh, the other Nancy. Okay, I thought that was something I should really know about. If I've acquired a husband here.
Right.
That's
and
funny.
That's what this class is about, Jewish humor. Oh,
So
okay.
now that we discovered there's two Nancys, when you said that Nancy, you look very well tonight or very good tonight, you weren't even talking to me.
That's a whole, Nancy Smith, that's a whole nother joke. I'm not lovely. Okay.
Yeah, I don't look well. I don't look good. Okay.
Sorry. So welcome everyone to A Window in Judaism. As you probably know, I am Rabbi Michael Birnholz, and the goal of this is to give you a window into Judaism. This is not a challah making class. We are going to get a little bit of an opportunity to eat because I made challah tonight. It's one of the things I love doing. But my goal is to take an artifact of Jewish life, challah, which is bread, and show you using challah as a way of talking about Jewish tradition, about Jewish history, about Jewish culture, about Jewish values, our sense of time, and our sense of place. Next week, as we gather for our class, we'll be talking about the Seder plate. The final class will be talking about the pomegranate. So 7 o'clock for these next 3 Tuesdays, we'll be talking each one a different artifact. Okay? So as we are going, we start with a piece of text that reminds us why it's important to start and to come together and study. Elu devarim she'en lahem shi'or she'adam ochel perotehem ba'olam hazeh v'hakeren kayemet lo le'olam haba ve'elu hen. These are the things we do in our lifetime that make this world a better place and will be remembered about us after we have died. They are kibud av va'im, honor your father and mother, ugmilud chasadim, do acts of love and kindness, v'hashkamat beit hamidrash shacharit ve'arvit, attend the house of study morning and night, v'haknasat orchim, welcome guests in your home, uvikor cholim, visit the sick, v'haknasat kala, celebrate with the bride and groom, uvayat hamet, pay your respects when someone dies, v'yun tefillah, pray to the best of your ability, v'haba'at shalom bein adam l'chavero, make peace when people disagree, the Talmud Torah keneged kulam, and we realize that the study of Torah is equal to all of these things because by studying Torah, we learn how, when, and why to do all of these things. And the blessing for study is very simple. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to la'asok, which means to engage in, but also to soak in words of Torah. Now, some of you probably cannot read the Hebrew, and that's okay. If you have a question about a word that I use or a phrase, if I'm talking fast or you can't understand my hands through the mask, just let me know, okay? I do talk with my hands, I do walk when I teach, and I do tend to get excited because I love teaching, which might make it hard to be able to hear, but just let me know. If you have questions, and that goes out for my Zoomies out there, if you have questions, raise your hand. That's okay. I do have a lot to share. I tend to prepare a lot more materials than I could ever teach in one segment of time. But part of it is, and I did a window into Judaism class, and I was teaching in Jewish sense of time, and somebody raised their hand and said, wait, this doesn't make sense. And I understood that they had a different paradigm of trying to understand what I was teaching than I was, and we were able to have an incredible discussion because of it. That is part of this, is I might be opening the window, but I'm hoping that you're going to come through and engage in words of Torah. There's actually a saying that when two people sit to study Torah together, the divine presence rests between them. Now, the other thing is, how many of you eat? Eat.
Eat.
You all eat. Yes, good. Okay. Now, look at this list for a second, right? These are the things we do. And I'm going to go back. So, oops, too far. These are the things we do in our lifetime that make this world a better place, right? These are the things that have measure, that make an impact. Look at the list. Don't worry about the packet yet. I'll tell you when we're there. Look at the list. How many of these things involve food? None of them on their surface do, okay? But when we talk about honoring your father and mother, does that involve food? Did any of you ever eat with your parents? Did any of you have parents that made you food? Do any of you have a stake in what your children or grandchildren eat? Right? Food is part of honoring your father and mother. Acts
And
of love
also
and
by
kindness.
having good manners as a child.
Ah,
when you
yes.
eat.
Well, so Nancy, the last part will be a discussion of whether you're supposed to slice or tear. No. Okay. If you are doing acts of love and kindness, someone is sick, what do?
Bring chicken soup.
You bring them chicken soup, right? Attend the house of study morning and night. I know we are not the only community that does Bible study. And when you have Bible study, what are you supposed to have? You're supposed to have a nosh. You've got to have a bagel. It's maybe some fruit, a smear of cream cheese. Okay? When you attend the house of study morning and night, you got to have a nosh. When you welcome guests in your home, you feed them. When you visit the sick, we already got the chicken soup. Right? When you celebrate with a bride and groom, do you have food at the wedding? Absolutely. When someone dies, do you have food at the memorial?
Yes.
When you pray, half of our prayers are about food. Right? In fact, Catholics stop in the middle of their service to eat. Okay? We won't comment about the pomegranate puckers on my bima. Okay? And when people disagree, how often, to get people to engage with each other, do you get them to sit and have a cup of coffee and a muffin together? Okay? Preferably blueberry. I don't know why. I'm just throwing that one out there. Okay? I've got to make muffins for my wife's school. I'm thinking chocolate chip oatmeal muffins, but that's a whole different discussion. Okay. So these are 10 things that we are supposed to do that leave an impact in the world long after we have died. None of them talk about food, but all of them involve food. And so that's something to understand. I think about religion in general, but in Judaism very much so, that when we sit together to engage with each other and engage with the divine, food is an important part of that experience. Some would tell you the only important part of that experience. I often joke the only reason I go to Israel is for the food. So there is a beautiful text of Jewish life called Pirkei Avot. And Pirkei Avot, Wisdom of the Sages, is from about 200 of the Christian era, and it is a collection of statements of Jewish wisdom. One of them is exactly what we're going to do in this class. It's this. Ashlosha Devarim, Ha'olam Omed. On the three things does the world stand. Torah, which is study. Avodah, which is an act of ritual. And Gimilut Chasadim, acts of loving kindness. Now, as you look at this list, tonight we're going to be talking about Challah, which is kind of an act of study. You're going to see what I mean as we go. Next week is the Seder plate, which is an artifact of ritual. And then the last will be pomegranates, which are a symbol of loving kindness. Okay? So just so you understand, I've picked 3 kind of random artifacts, but there's not randomness in them. They have some really incredible depth to them. Okay, this is on your page, but you don't have to look at the page if you want to look up here, if you can see that. Are you able to see that? Okay. And you all at home, you can obviously see the screen that I'm sharing. Okay. That was a thumbs up, Ellen, and not another hand gesture. Okay. So, there are 3 elements I want you to have in mind: ritual, text, and artifact. The ritual is an action. The text is the story that you tell while you do that action. And the artifact is a physical object. This is a hand washing vessel. I'll show you we'll talk about it more formally. This is the artifact. I say a prayer before I wash my hands, and then I wash my hands with it. Artifact, ritual, text. Okay? We're going to be talking, and that's a lot of Jewish life, is connections and combinations of ritual, an action, a text, the story, and an artifact, a physical object. It's really quite extraordinary how often this comes up. Okay? Also, absolutely beautiful saying that I saw on a podcast about food. Somebody had made latkes, and latkes are potato pancakes. And what he said was, "Aye, that's Jewish. You make something, and then you figure out what story you were telling with it." Okay? That is often what happens in Judaism, that we'll do something, and then we'll figure out what it means. But that means that everything means something. There aren't a lot of wasted actions. There's not a lot of wasted words. It's all part of something that's drawing us together. We even use, and that's a rather incredible part of Judaism, we even use humor as a way of creating meaning, as a spiritual experience. Okay? So tonight we're going to be, how's my challah doing? Oh, that's good, because it was worrying me there for a second. Is it out of the oven? Okay. We're going to be talking about challah, and these are some of the things you're going to see. That we value space, not like space, the final frontier, but space, like physical space, is really important in Judaism. Time, the sense of time and where we are in time, and if I'm here in my present, am I remembering the past? And where am I in the calendar? Time is something that is very critical in Judaism. There's also that challah, this braided egg bread. Does everybody know what challah looks like? You all know what challah looks like.
Yeah.
Okay. So challah is a vehicle for living out our values. It's not just a loaf of bread. It's so much more than that. In those little braids and those little pockets of doughy goodness are incredible values that we bring forth in so many different ways. Judaism also, as we talk about challah, we're going to talk about some of the other cultures that are in it. We had a class earlier this week on noodle, not just on noodle kugel. Noodle kugel is a type of kugel, and there are so many different types of kugel. As we talk about challah being a bread that is used on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, there are other breads that get used, and everybody's got a little twist on their challah. And the final piece of this is debate and discussion. I don't like to use the word argue because it's easy to say argue has a negative connotation, but we argue with each other a lot. We debate and we discuss. And it's not because in Judaism, sometimes you'll see there's not one answer for it. There might be one question, but it's in the process of talking about all of the possible answers that a couple of things happen. One is that we get a very good sense of what our values are. And two, when you really sit and discuss with someone, and Jane, are you a tearer or a slicer? You're both. Ay, ay, ay. You tear your challah and you slice your challah?
She's so diplomatic.
She's so diplomatic. Ay, ay, ay. Okay, so that's what then I'll be able to say, well, who taught you to tear? Who taught you to slice? Why do you do that? Where did you have your best loaf of challah? We have a whole discussion starting with that one issue of whether you slice or tear, that then becomes a way of getting to know the people around you or who you are sitting there and quite literally breaking bread with. Okay? So that's what we're going to be talking about, and I'm going to be going through these. On the floor over here are a few different cookbooks. This is the Modern Jewish Baker. Her name is Shannon Sarna. And if you know the Canorak family, she went to school with Lisa. And there's a whole section dedicated to challah. Sweet challahs, savory challahs. This is the 100 Most Jewish Foods put out by Moment Magazine. Tablet Mag, Tablet. And it flipped to burnt offerings. I didn't do that. Chopped liver, they're in. Yes, it just had Chinese food. Karoset, cheesecake, challah. Okay, so there's a chapter on challah, and this. The braided, a journey of 1,000 challahs. This is a woman who has written an entire memoir about her experience of every Shabbat baking challah. And this is actually the recipe that I used. I also gave you a recipe for something called a fractal challah, which you'll actually see the video for, okay? When we get there. Are there any questions so far?
No.
Yes, Nancy.
I just wanted to add on that braided. She is a MD, and I think she's also a rabbi. Is that correct?
I do not know.
Oh, okay, I think she
Just use
is.
in fact, I haven't ever finished the book. I got as far as using her recipe, and that's where I stopped. Yes, she is an MD. I don't know if she's a rabbi, but she has the best simple challah recipe I found.
Yes.
Okay, that is the Jewish answer. Okay?
What?
I ask a question, a binary question, and I got an entire explanation with commentary. Okay? That's going to keep happening over time, and it's okay. That's the space we kind of live in Judaism, that you will try to get a simple answer, and the simple answer in Judaism is the process of answering a question, and the experience of answering a question that creates connection between human beings. That's the answer, not just the information. Okay? So we are moving right along. So we are in Jewish space, and this is in the packet if that's small. Talking about space. The spaces we're talking about are the tabernacle or tent of meeting that they built when they were at Mount Sinai, that they used for wandering through the wilderness. The first temple that was built by Solomon in Jerusalem, and the second temple that was built by Ezra and Nehemiah after the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians. The second temple was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 of the Christian era. Now, the place you're sitting in inhabits that space. This is a Beit Knesset, a house of gathering, and a lot of the stuff that you see in this sanctuary is a resonance of what was in the tabernacle and the first two temples. For example, the first two temples and the tabernacle, they would have had a 7-branch menorah, okay? They would have had an eternal light. They would have had a Holy of Holies with the 10 Commandments inside. This has actually got our Torah scrolls inside. Now, the Torah scrolls, even though opening the ark, you don't have to stand up. This will become important in just a moment. The Torah scrolls are dressed as the priests of ancient Israel. So if you look at the descriptions that's actually in this week's Torah portion, that has a headdress, a binder, a mantle. Sometimes these actually have chest plates, breastplates on them, like the priests did. Okay? There are even bells, like the priests had on their robes. What is a Torah scroll written on? Parchment animal skin, the skin of a sacrificial animal. Okay? So, and we take the Torah out, so it's dressed like a priest on the skin of a sacrificial animal, and we take it out and read the words at the time they were doing the sacrifices. Okay? And so this room has a resonance, a space that resonates with the Torah, with the tabernacle and the temples of Jerusalem. Marlene, if it's getting stuffy in here, okay, because we can, okay. That's this room. However, one of the things that is important in Judaism is when the first temple is destroyed and the Jewish people are taken to exile in Babylonia, they took their sense of Jewish space with them. And we have it in all sorts of ways. How do we, in little ways, create small sanctuaries? Challah is very much a part of that, because we actually envision the dinner table as a mikdash, a holy place, ma'at, a miniature holy place. Okay? In ancient world, in order to eat, when they wanted to do a ritual, they sacrificed an animal. Okay? They didn't burn up the animal whole. It was holy barbecue. And they were having bread and they were having wine. Some of us call that dinner. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you have food and drink? No, you didn't drink anything? You got to hydrate, man. It's good, important for you. Okay? So a lot of what we do at the table has a resonance with ritual that connects us to the sacrifices. Okay? We don't do sacrifices anymore. It's not a sacrifice, but it connects us to it. So if you look here, the word challah made its appearance more than 2,500 years ago, spelled chet lamed hey in Hebrew. Books, including Leviticus, that there were 12 loaves called chalot that were placed Shabbat in the tabernacle. And so now, even here, 2,500 years later, we put a bread that we call challah on our table for Shabbat. In the book of Numbers, the Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people, and say to them, when you enter the land which I am taking you, when you eat of the bread of the land, the challah, you shall set aside as a gift to the Eternal the first yield of your baking. You shall set aside a loaf of a gift, set it aside as a gift like the threshing floor. You shall make a gift to the Eternal, first yield of your baking throughout the years." And wouldn't you know it, there's actually a ritual where you take a little bit of your challah and tear it off and say that's for somebody else. That goes back to God. Okay? But you can see we're sitting down to eat, and what do? We are saying this challah is a reminder of these offerings that remind us of the bounty of the earth that we're thanking God for. And finally, salt was an important part of the sacrifices. And there are people that actually sprinkle or dip their challah in a little bit of salt For you shall season your every offering of meal with salt. You shall not omit from your meal offering the salt of your covenant with God. With all your offerings, you must offer salt. So as we're eating challah, into that is woven little pieces of those rituals. I mentioned hand washing. The priests of ancient Israel had all kinds of rituals they did to purify themselves before they did the offering. And you will see in some places where people will wash their hands and then they will say, that's the first blessing. Are you all losing me?
No.
No. Okay. You will wash your hands, and then you will say the blessing below, which is hamotzi. And hamotzi, I'm going on. Okay. Hamotzi is saying, thank you, God, for giving us this bread of the earth. And there's actually a whole elaborate piece that you wash your hands and you don't say anything until you say the blessing before you eat, because that is it's all part of one ritual, okay? And so, think about that whole experience for just a moment, that just like the priests of ancient Israel, before you go and eat challah, you are doing rituals of purification. That eating of challah is one of those ways that we help the table feel like a mikdash ma'at, that we connect it to the rituals and that space of the tabernacle and the temple in Jerusalem. Give me 1 second. I'm going to move the cursor that's in front of the screen that you can't therefore see. Okay, any questions? Now you'll also see here there's a reference to tea making or dinner table a temple. That is an article. You actually have a full article. I didn't want to put it onto the PowerPoint and read through it because it's kind of beautiful, but it's also quite elaborate. And I wanted time to go through some other things, but it is in your packet if you would like to read it after our class. But it brings up a lot of those dynamics I spoke of and even more. Challah is also, just as much as it helps us say this is a place full of meaning, it is also something that helps us establish boundaries of time. Time is vital in Judaism. Time is even more important than space, because we can go anywhere, but time is universal. Wherever I go in the world, when the sun sets on Friday, it's Shabbos. It's Shabbat. Okay? Wherever I go, the moon is going to be in the same phase. Wherever I go, there's going to be the same seasons. And then you're going to say, but Rabbi, in Australia, the seasons are opposite. Yes, and it makes for some interesting Jewish life, I'm sure, but they still have the same, it might be winter here and summer there, but it's still that same timing of the seasons. Okay? So time, even more than space, is really vital. Challah is a way of tuning in to time. When we sit down to eat challah, we're supposed to know, this is Shabbat. I'll even tell you something. What night is tonight? Tuesday. And wouldn't you know, I had trouble with the dough. Because I wasn't making it for Shabbat. I wasn't making it for the Sabbath, and the dough didn't turn out the way I wanted.
Aww.
If I do the same exact thing on Friday, it'll be perfect, I'm sure. Okay? I have no idea if that's true or not, but it sure seems like a good thing. Okay. How is it a reminder of time? Here you have Exodus. Okay? This is about the gathering of manna in the wilderness. This is reading F. So they gathered it every morning, each as much as he needed to eat, for when the sun grew hot, it would melt. On the sixth day, they gathered the double amount of food, 2 omers each. And when all the chieftains of the community came and told Moses, he said to them, this is what the Eternal meant. Tomorrow is a day of rest. a holy Sabbath to the eternal. Bake what you would bake and boil what you would boil, and all that is left put aside to be kept until morning. And so they put it aside until morning, as Moses had ordered. It did not turn foul, there were no maggots. And Moses said, eat it today, for today is the Sabbath, the eternal. You will not find it today on the plain. 6 days you shall gather it. On the seventh day, the Sabbath, there will be none. And so you will actually see in Jewish life that a lot of people will have two chalot, two loaves, that they'll put together and say the blessing. What are they doing? They're remembering two things. Time. They're remembering the experience of the wilderness when God provided manna. And they're also remembering 6 days we work. And on the seventh day, they got an extra portion. The seventh day, our relationship with time and what we do and our whole sense of activity is supposed to change. Okay? Our world is a little different than it was 100 years ago or 150 years ago. 150 years ago, they did not go to the store and get a 5-pound bag of King Arthur bread flour. Okay? Our ancestors in Eastern Europe, during the week, what kind of flour would they have used for their bread? They were using barley, right? They were using spelt. They were using other not great flours for their bread. They were using really rustic stuff because that was cheap and available. What did they use for the challah?
Wheat?
Wheat, the good stuff. Not just wheat, but the really good, beautiful flours. Okay? It was just different. You knew it even by the quality of the bread you ate. That was the day of God. And so you had very elaborate, beautiful, tasty, yummy bread that you put honey into. Right? You put your finest ingredients because that's Shabbat. You could actually taste the Sabbath in texture and taste and flavor and smell because something different is happening. Okay? Questions? Now, yes. Manna? That's a great question. It's white stuff. It's white stuff. It was flaky stuff they were picking up off the ground. No one's quite sure what it was, but you could grind it up and make it into loaves. You could put it on your cereal. There were all kinds of different descriptions of what manna is. My dad actually was doing teaching that they think it might be something that was coming off of aphids. Yeah, there's all kinds of elaborate things. Manna just means a portion. Okay? Yeah, so one of those incredible mysteries of the Bible. Okay. So,
Rabbi, I have just a quick question. Earlier in the reading, it said something about there was dessert tabernacle. Did they have a special tabernacle that they had the challah? Was that considered a dessert?
So that, Nancy, is a question of one S, two S's. If you take the word dessert and erase one of the S's, you get a desert, as in a dry, unlivable place. It wasn't a dessert tabernacle, it was a desert tabernacle.
Oh, okay. Desert tabernacle.
But I do like the idea of dessert tabernacles. So that might be the name of our bakery. The dessert tabernacle. Sounds good, doesn't it? Bad news is I'm more of a bread baker. Yes, Vivian. Go ahead, Vivian. You're muted. Okay.
About the slides before. I was fortunate enough to attend a Shabbat with modern Orthodox, very good friends. And you answered a couple of questions. One was, I didn't understand why, when the challah was passed around, we were actually in a sukkah. And the host, my friend Ephraim, handed out, he tore the challah and handed everybody a piece of the challah before he made the motzi. And he pointed to me and he went like this. He put his finger up, not to speak. It was absolutely silent. I had absolutely no idea because, you get we're about 10 people, and not from the little children to the adults, nobody spoke. And the other thing that happened was that he took salt. I never understood. It's commandment. I never understood why. And he's the only person I ever saw do it. Everyone there followed him. And before they tasted, after the motzi, and before they tasted the challah. And the third thing was when I learned to make challah, you were present. I remembered a friend and much older woman saying, when you make challah, take a piece of the dough after you form the challah.
So, Vivian, hold that thought because I'm going to come to it.
Okay, fine. Because
So-
it's all coming true now.
So there are all these little different teachings, and they're taught from family to family and person to person and community to community. Some do this, others do that. Look at this. This is great. Okay? Practical question. How many strands are included in a beautiful braided loaf? Okay? So how many would you like to take a guess? I've got 8. 6. 12. LaGuardia's, you want to take a guess? 4. No one said 3. I only can braid 3. I have 2 children that had long hair, and I've never figured out how to do more than a 3-strand braid. Anyway, look at this. Practical question. How many strands? Traditions. There are 3, 4, 6, 8, or 12 are the most common, and there are at least as many explanations for this tradition. That's part of it, is realize there are lots of different traditions, but I share this with you because look at each one of them. Some say that strands should look like arms intertwined, for the loaf symbolizes love, consistent with Shabbat being the traditional time to make love. Okay? Enjoy Sabbath and be fruitful and holy. It's also, what do we sing at the beginning of Shabbat? Lecha Dodi. And we're welcoming the Sabbath bride, Shabbat as a bride, to come in because Israel and the Sabbath are bound together. Okay? 3 braids can symbolize truth, peace, and justice, or maybe it's past and present and future, or Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or the 3 commands to observe the appearance of 10 commandments, more, which Zachor, remember, Shamor, Dibur Echad, in one word. It might be the 4 strands. So 4 might be Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, since it's usually Jewish women who prepare Challah, or in fact, maybe the 4 strands remind us that there are 4 worlds in the Jewish mystical tradition. 6 braids could represent 6 days of a week leading up to Shabbat, and intertwining our experience of the week, culminating in the beauty of Shabbat. 8 strands might be new beginnings in the future, the circumcision on the 8th day of a birth of a male child. And then you get 12 as the 12 tribes of Israel. Each loaf is generally oblong, and then you get a whole 1 letter because it really spells God's name. Okay? Did you follow all of that?
Wow.
Isn't that, it's
Somewhat.
absolutely incredible, because each time when you're braiding your challah, you're making a story. And then you're bringing that story that is more, it's just more than just a loaf. And the last paragraph. However many strands are braided, twisted, or woven into the challah, eating it as part of welcoming Shabbat symbolizes the weaving of our weekday mentality into a Shabbat state of mind, the braiding of the weekday mindset into a more sublime Shabbat-driven consciousness. May we each enter Shabbat in beauty, honor, and strength. And I'm going to give you the bread maker's experience of that. When usually you make a loaf, you form a loaf, and you put it aside, and then you bake it. There's an extra step with challah. You take your loaf, you split it into the strands, and then you have to weave them together before you bake them. And if you're making your challah on Friday, it's that I'm still making bread, but this bread has something a little different, a little extra, and then you're also, and this is one of the things I love about it, who am I making it for? We'll talk about that a little bit more. But this is part of that sense of time. How do we weave that sense of time? And think about each past and present and future. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, and Rachel, the 12 tribes. Each one of those is a different way of connecting with a different Jewish story from our past to bring it into our Sabbath. Yes?
Braids there are, it's just up to the baker. And when they do that, are they thinking of one of those rules that's what we're going to talk about today?
Some do, and some don't. And yes, there are all kinds of different traditions. In fact, if you want to go see Challah art, it is rather incredible what people will do with color, with shape, to do all kinds of different things with their challah. It's not, it's the process and the experience, not just the form of it. Now, somebody will tell you there are 4 braids in a challah, but somebody else will tell you there's 6, or there's somebody that will tell you 3. That's part of Judaism. We argue and discuss and debate those things and why we're doing it. Okay? I am going to play a video for you. But I have a problem. Okay. Can you all at home hear that?
I don't hear it.
No.
Oh, okay, now I do.
That's on his screen.
No need to hang your head in disarray. You know that it's just a change now. I've heard that it's just a change. I was at a funeral some years ago for the mom of a good friend of mine. I was there with a shoulder to cry on, but prone to get choked off. But see, she wore a bright yellow summer dress and a big sad smile on her face. So that she's in a much better place now, a good thing to recognize. Hey Arthur, don't look away.
Oh,
No need to hang your head in disarray. You know that it's just a change, yeah. I've heard that it's just a change. Hey Arthur, don't look dismayed. No need to hang your head in disarray. You know that it's just a change, yeah. I've heard that it's just a change. Yeah, I was at an industry conference up in the north of Virginia. I ran into a salesman's wife, a woman from Chardonnay. She whispered to me drunkenly, she believes that the body's a vessel, and the soul moves on to another dimension.
That's what they call an oven in New York City.
Hey, I said, don't look away. No need to hang your head in disarray. You know that it's just a change, yeah. I've heard that it's just a change. Hey, I said, don't look dismayed. No need to hang your head in disarray. You know that it's just a change, yeah. I've heard that it's just a change.
So I love that, do love that video. Not this, even without the song, but the subtitles under it. Challah is such a model of our values, right? He was talking about memory. He was talking about family. He was talking about who you're going to share that with. If you heard the song, it was I went to a shiva today. He's thinking about people that he would be taking care of. That video, and so again, he's Asian. His husband is Jewish. He learned the challah recipe from his husband, from his mother-in-law, and he did a mixture of an Asian milk bread and challah. And there you saw where he had 3 braids that he then rebraided together. Okay, let's go for really elaborate. And he's talking as he's sitting there waiting for it to rise. He's thinking about all of the other things he's learned in this year. And then he's also thinking about, wait, who am I going to pass this recipe, this experience, who am I baking the bread for? Just even that video shows that in the challah, it's more than time and space. It's such a locus, it's such a powerful part of all of these different Jewish values. This is an article, this is the basis for what challah is also supposed to be. In observance of the mitzvah, when people entered the land of Israel, anyone who baked bread was obligated to give a portion of their dough to the priests, the Kohanim, who worked in the temple. This dough was part of the salary of the priests who essentially function as public servants doing the temple's work. Today, there is no temple in Jerusalem, and this is the practice of taking challah. Hafrashat challah is still around. Instead of bringing the dough to the Kohanim, though, we separate a small piece of dough about the size of an olive and either burn it or dispose of it respectively, rendering it inedible the portion that God commanded set aside. Okay? And so, Vivian, this is exactly what you were talking about, that there is a practice, and a lot of people do this. The other thing that happens, by the way, which you'll see in the braided challah recipe, is as you're mixing the dough, you've all heard of baking with love, right? This is the same kind of thing. You're supposed to say, I am making this with sending the healing energies to so-and-so, or I'm sending this with blessings for so-and-so. You actually, as you're making the dough, think of the goodness you can send out into the world. And this is taking that and turning it into physical action, where you say, some of this doesn't belong to me. And some people will absolutely burn it, and you'll see all kinds of different rules and explanations for doing that. I actually have a little bit of a different response. So this is from an article I wrote a few years, 10 years ago. And the Hebrew word challah is actually found in Torah. Section of Numbers, the Israelites were set aside a loaf of bread, challah, for the offering was a way of appreciating the service of the Kohen and thanking God for a successful grain harvest. Agricultural society wavering between famine and plenty, the ancient Israelites understood how blessed they were to have food that they could share. In modern Judaism, we acknowledge or mirror this act by separating a piece of dough and reciting a blessing before baking the loaf of challah. Some instructions say that you should throw away the piece of dough. Others direct the baker to burn it until it's unusable. This is me, offer a different alternative. One could separate a small piece from the main loaf and bake it to perfection to share as a gift. Like the offering given to the ancient priests, you could give this representative little loaf to someone as a thank you for someone, or to someone who needs a pick-me-up, right? So even in making challah, to think about the place of holy, create spaces of holiness, even as you're making challah to acknowledge times of holiness, you can even, as you're doing that, then turn it into a gimilut chasadim, an act of loving kindness, thinking about showing as an act of appreciation or as an act of care. It's a vehicle for all of those things at once, okay? Different cultures, I promised you some different types of Sabbath breads. Challah is the most universal in Jewish life, but here's something called berches, which is a water challah, braided loaf enriched with mashed potato instead of eggs. Never heard of that. German Jews bless it on Shabbat. In other parts of the world, Sabbath bread takes other forms.
Remember, Rick said.
Ethiopian Jews use dabo, which is a soft, honey-sweetened loaf spiced with turmeric and nigella, poppy seeds. Tunisian Jews eat bejma, a yeasted bread formed into doughy triangles. Moroccan and Syrian Jews traditionally decorate their Sabbath tables with whole wheat flat loaves called kubs adi. And then Nona, you got your microphone working. Okay. So those are a wide variety of different types of Sabbath breads. And here's the big debate: to tear or to slice. Okay? Now, you should ask me, am I a tearer or a slicer? I am a tearer. Okay? I love tearing it into it. It's got little nubbies, little nodules, and you just pull it off, right? And I love the explanation that a knife is a weapon of war. It's something man crafted. I like the idea of something very organic and tearing apart a challah. That feels like Shabbos to me, okay? But then you will also get the other people that will make the opposite argument that animals tear their food. We are civilized, so we are going to slice our challah. But we also now live in a time of COVID when we have to be a lot more sanitary than tearing challah, and so now I slice and I regret every minute of it, okay? There's a different argument as well, because what is leftover challah best used for? French toast. And if you tear your challah, that will screw up your ability to make French toast, so it's important to slice your challah so that unless you know that you can eat it all in one sitting, which is really not that hard, because it's really, really good and addictive, you should slice your challah so that you know that you have it apportioned well for the next morning to make French toast. These are really important religious considerations. And if you haven't had French toast, it's a religious experience. That's a whole nother discussion. Okay, so here is a challah plate. Okay, as a slicer, I'm a ripper. It's a problem. I've known that my husband was a challah cutter before we got married, but never thought to question why such a generally sensible man would espouse to such an obviously incorrect opinion. So I finally sat down and asked him. There are two reasons. Really? Ay, ay, ay. Ugh, creak back. Okay, everybody turn to page 5. So I'm at the bottom of this is the bottom paragraph of page 5. Josh cited several quite pragmatic reasons for slicing the challah each Friday night. Cutting creates less surface area than ripping, which means the challah stays fresher longer. Slicing preserves the integrity of any uneaten challah, which allows the possibility of French toast in the morning. Finally, it's easier to maintain appropriate portion control with neatly cut slices. And as if that were enough, he went on to cite a few religious reasons for cutting the challah. Word of warning, never get into a debate with a Jewish day school graduate. It's just not worth it. He believes there are primary references of ripping and tearing involves rending one's garment in mourning, clearly not appropriate action for the table, yada, yada, yada. Furthermore, in the days of the temple, Jews showed their devotion to God by sacrificing the animal, which was done with a swift, clean cut. And therefore, since the Beit HaMikdash temple was used to locate on the Temple Mount was destroyed, our dinner tables have become our altars, meaning we should cut our challah. Yes, those are all reasonable arguments, I suppose. The thing is, he's wrong. I don't claim to have any fancy pants reasons why I prefer to tear challah. It's just something so visceral and delicious about sinking my hands. I prefer tearing the challah. Delicious sinking my hands into a warm piece of bread. I just love grabbing those big braided knobs, each bite combination of sweet crust and warm doughy goodness. Tearing challah is a great equalizer. Everyone in the table, including our 2-year-old daughter, can reach over and pull off a hunk. Perhaps most importantly, tearing is faster when I'm hungry. When there's a warm challah on the table, I'm always hungry. Now you're wondering how this grave conflict is resolved each Friday night. Back before we had kids, I let Josh slice away, mostly because I was hoping for his amazing French toast in the morning. But now, today, we have a toddler who loves nothing more to sink her grubby little hands into a fresh challah. Oh, I'm the mommy, and I win. We rip. Epilogue. After I finished writing this, I showed it to Josh. He agreed with everything, but noted that I failed to mention the most important reason why he's so adamantly pro-slicing, because it annoys the hell out of me. Well, shoot, I guess he wins after all. Okay?
Cute.
Yes? Comments? They're all just smiling at this. Okay?
Good story.
Does it matter if we tear or if we slice? It all depends if you're making French toast or not. That's true. If you want to have more toast for it in the morning, then you should probably slice and not tear. Right? And
you want to make sure your hands are clean.
And then you got to make sure your hands are clean. But that's why this is such an incredible Jewish artifact. Not because there's an answer, but because you can ask the questions and you can have powerful, meaningful discussions about what you learned, who you learned it from, why you like doing things. And you might have some kind of incredible meeting of the minds in order to be able to do both and. Now,
Rabbi?
Hold on 1 second. Yep. Yeah. Yes, just regular French toast. Okay, which we have somebody from France on, so we could even find out if they actually make French toast in France. Do you make French, John? Do you make French toast in France?
Yes. I have no idea.
Okay, that answers that question.
Make French
Okay.
toast.
According to I'll do, which is different.
Ah,
They use bread, French bread. We do the same thing.
Why would they bother with French toast? Okay, was there a question from Zoom land? Yes,
Yes.
Ella.
okay. But then there's also the caveat that why do, for example, I despise pre-sliced bread? Because I did not, it was not my, it takes away my autonomy. So whether you tear or whether you slice, the important thing is to have autonomy over your own bread.
Good point.
It's not just, and there's on the page below is a whole even more religious and then technical explanation. You slice in a particular way because you don't want to cut all the way through it until you say the blessing, because you got to say the blessing before you make the whole cut. And there's a way that you can cut it so that you spell God's name, because you want this to be part of that holy experience. There are all of these customs coming from all kinds of different directions, and they get experienced in all sorts of different ways. But I'm talking about a loaf of bread. I just waxed poetic for over an hour, teaching all of these people these pieces of Judaism, all from a loaf of bread. And that to me is the incredible piece, is it's not just a loaf of bread, it is this incredible symbol, an incredible vehicle for all of these amazing values and experiences. And that's why it's not that you have the extra helping of manna that you're remembering or the extra sacrifice of Shabbat. The reason you make 2 loaves is so you can tear one and slice one. That's a great answer, Jane. Yes. So it's interesting because the bread isn't holy. It's the experience of eating the bread as part of the meal on Shabbat that's holy, and not even holy. That's part of the ritual piece of it. So I think there is something to just eating the bread, the challah, but we just saw that the Syrian Jews had flatbreads that they had that were part of their Shabbat that they used for scooping up their stew was. So it depends on who you're talking to. It's not like a communion wafer, in that the wafer is holy and that's the ritual object. The challah is the bread that we're using, but it's the ritual that's the religious experience, not necessarily the bread itself.
My grandmother used to always eat bread.